Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Welcome, everyone, to the show. This is our special little tiny half hour that we try to do most Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time here in the northwest corner of the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where we take a little bit of time each week to think about our thinking, to set aside all the time we spend on what to think so we can give ourselves a little bit of time to focus on how to think. And today's show is a little bit different because we're going to talk about the hidden forces that derail decisions, but we're going to go to a different layer than where we commonly talk about where our decisions go haywire. And so let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat. We didn't make it on, for some reason, we didn't make it on the LinkedIn Learning Hub this week. So whenever we don't make it on the hub, sometimes there are fewer people. But the great thing about this show is audience participation. So even though we might have a skinnier audience today, streaming live from LinkedIn and from YouTube, if you are here, do participate and let us know who you are and where you're from. And if you're watching this after the live stream, participate. And there's a little lag on LinkedIn, so sometimes the questions and answers come in a little differently, but still, this is our chance to engage with people from around the world who like to think about our thinking. All right, so the first question up is, let's say you were offered travel insurance, like you planned some great trip and the tickets were non-refundable, all of the stuff was non-refundable, so you were offered travel insurance. And you could have A, insurance that would cover terrorist attacks, and B, you could have general travel insurance that covered everything. So A, you could have travel insurance that covered terrorist attacks, kind of like something out of left field, or B, you could have general travel insurance that covered everything. And you're going to pick which one. Now you could say, and let's just say that there's no cost difference. Now, before you answer, you should know that the place you're traveling could be a bit dangerous. Okay. So I'm going to welcome some people on the show, and we got some good people coming in from all over, and you're going to let me know, would you take A, the travel insurance that covered terrorist attacks? You're going to someplace dangerous, or would you take general travel insurance? All right. Let me say hi to Ray. Ray, welcome from Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. Ray is a regular good thinker to the show. Welcome, welcome. Steve from Cleveland. Hey, Barkley. Barkley's on a train passing through Baltimore, showing up for good thinking on the train. Fantastic. Jan, welcome from Boise, Idaho. Abdel Rahim, welcome from Sudan. Abdel Rahim. Oh, I like that name. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right. Olivier from Addis Ababa. Welcome. Stephen from the home to the best tasting Dungeness crab on the West Coast. Ha ha. Yay. And welcome to Dharmendra from Dubai. Come. So, all right. So Heather says B. Heather says would pick general travel insurance. Diamond, welcome. Good night. Good morning from us. Good night to you. All right. So we've got one vote for B. Heather would take the general travel insurance. Now, depending on how this was framed, more people in a similar experiment chose insurance that covered terrorist attacks. And this hints to one of the biggest ways that our brains can kind of have our decisions derailed. And we're going to get into that. But I just wanted to we'll start out with a little teaser for you to think about that. How would that be framed to make people choose to get insurance that covers terrorist attacks instead of general travel insurance that ostensibly covers everything? All right. Let's say hi to Sakib from India and Jan. So true. Traveling soon. Regular travel insurance. Yes. Regular travel insurance. All right. How do you prepare to make important decisions? Do you have a plan? My point is, do you have a system for yourself when you're going to make important decisions, not like, coffee or tea or, whatever, but important decisions, maybe strategic decisions. Do you have a plan in place? Because I'm going to suggest that by the end of today, you will, and it will lead to you making better decisions in all aspects of your life. And it's easier than you think, but we're going to get into all the layers of what derail decisions, and then we're going to get into the layer that you can easily control. And I'll give you a takeaway if you can't stay for the whole thing in just a minute, but hopefully you can stay for the whole thing. All right. So we've got regular travel insurance. So far, all of you good thinkers kind of didn't fall for my lame frame where I said you're traveling to a dangerous place. Because you're good thinkers. You don't fall for that stuff. I'm going to take the banner off. We still want people to let us know who you are and where you're from, but I'm making more room for the comments. Bad decisions can be traced to the way the decisions were made. And usually we look at decisions like, we didn't explore all the options. Maybe we didn't define them right. Maybe the information we collected was incorrect, or maybe we didn't collect enough information, or the cost benefits were not accurately weighed. But we look at the outcome. Usually, how many of you look to the outcome as the number one place you go to determine the quality of your decision? How many of you look to outcome? I look to outcome. I don't look to outcome. If you don't look to outcome, you could say, I look somewhere else, or, I haven't really thought about it. And that's totally fair too. We're going to change the way you think about decisions. All right. If you have to miss today, because you can't stay for the whole show, or you've got other things, or you're coming in late and you want to, all right, I'm going to give you one thing to remember, because I feel like this is so important and so helpful for people who are interested in thinking about their thinking that I just want to make sure we get this out there. If your decision process, and it could be your own decision process, it could be your organization's decision process or your company's decision process, if it doesn't account for VOMPs, VOMP, VOMPs, the process is bound to fail more often than necessary. All right. So if your process is a personal process, it's an organizational process, doesn't account for VOMPs, you can do better. And that's what we're going to do today. Now, how many of you are familiar with the term VOMPs? How many of you are familiar? You might have gotten that from one of our LinkedIn learning courses on decision making. I think that might be in removing noise and bias from strategic decisions. How many of you are familiar with this concept of VOMPs, which stands for variations in our mental processes, or processes, if you want to get fancy? How many of you familiar with VOMPs, not familiar with VOMPs? Aha, Mahmoud, welcome from Egypt, but you live in Saudi Arabia. Fantastic. Fantastic. So you bring two perspectives, which is great. Now, here is the situation. These variations in our mental processes. Now, it's easy to see, like, that you process things differently than your best friend or your partner or your kid or your neighbor. You kind of accept that we might have variations in how we process the same information. We might know this when we experience the exact same thing, a sporting event, a picnic in the park, watching some debate. And we come away with a completely different perspective, completely different analysis, deciding on completely different ways that we want to put that in our brains as having experienced that, completely different than someone else, even though we experience the exact same thing. So we know that we do this between people. We know that. But what is not as apparent is no matter what our tendencies are, our defaults, what makes us us, we also differ from ourselves, depending on situations that we often fail to consider. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about derailing decisions. So we're going to start at a level and we're going to kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper. Okay, so look what we have. Well, we have Nina, welcome from Riga, welcome. And then we have, so it's VOMP without the I, VOMPs, variations in our mental processes. You added an I, but that works. You can't say it. VOMP, VOMPs. Excellent. All right. So do you accept that you don't always make rational decisions? Yes or no? I'm going to say yes. I accept that in spite of trying and trying and trying and trying and working, because it's a lifelong learning process, I don't always make rational decisions. Now, in behavioral science, this has been known for decades. I mean, it hasn't been known for hundreds of years. Like 100 years ago, people didn't realize that humans don't make rational decisions. We thought we make rational decisions. It's all the other animals out there that are irrational. But now we know that we don't. But in spite of knowing that we don't, here's a tricky thing. We think that sometimes we do. Maybe we do. I don't know. We think that sometimes we do. So how do we know the difference? Well, we can see other people not making rational. I see people all the time not making rational decisions. But if my outcomes are fine, if I'm successful, if I'm happy, if I'm healthy, if I'm this, how do I know whether my decisions are rational? Here is the question. I see other people all the time. Do you know when you are making an irrational decision before you see an outcome? All right. So Dharmendra says yes. Yes. Dharmendra realizes, yes, I know we don't make rational decisions. Okay. Ray says, I accept that if I'm lucky, I make a rational decision. Okay. That gets a rubber chicken. Exactly. I would say all of that is probably due to some element of luck. There's always an element of luck. Okay, then do you agree that leaders say that we make so many decisions in a day that we can't make all the right decisions? Also, do you agree with decision fatigue? I agree with both of those. And those are going to be a little hint, because we can't do everything, but we can do some things to remove what derails our decisions. And we're going to get into this in just a minute. Jan, it's got to be more than the outcome. Yes. Outcome bias is difficult. And I've said this before in other episodes, which is, if I decide I want to go viral, I'm going to do something that is going to go viral on YouTube, for example. Just, not that I care about going viral. I'm going to put a blindfold on my face and I'm going to walk out in massive traffic and have someone record me. And if I live, I'm going to go viral. Well, that could be a great outcome, but it could be a dumb decision. So good outcomes come from bad decisions and bad outcomes come from good decisions. So outcome bias is something to look out for. It's probably, I think, between outcome bias and hindsight bias, like I knew it all along, those are probably two of the most important biases to be aware of in decision making. But we're going to go beyond biases. So how would you rate your awareness of biases on a scale from 1, I don't know anything about biases, to 5, I'm pretty bias savvy? How would you rate your awareness of biases? Let us know in the chat. Let everyone know in the chat. Come clean. Because I think I'm very aware of biases. I've been studying it for a long time. Let's go deeper. Do you think, when you think of biases and your knowledge of biases, do you think more in the implicit bias kind of realm, which is maybe up here, how it looks? Maybe it shows up as racial bias or gender bias or age bias or disability bias or weight bias or any of the things, all of these implicit biases, a bias, which actually implicit bias came from people rating spiders faster to words like scary than butterflies. So it's kind of a word association bias. Or do you feel like you're more, when you think of biases, you think more of cognitive biases, which cognitive biases are kind of more toward the root of what causes implicit bias, the heuristics, the shortcuts we take. So let's get to some of these. We have got Snahalata is a 3. Okay, right in the middle there. Heather, 3.5. Paul Wilson, very aware. Okay, so Paul, Heather, and Snahalata, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Things are scrolling fast, so I have to grab them. When you think of biases, when you're rating yourself, are you rating yourself more on the implicit bias realm, or are you rating yourself on the cognitive bias realm? All right, so Heather says cognitive bias. All right, so whether it's confirmation bias or affect heuristic, where you rate how you feel impacts, like I really like that person, I'm going to hire them, versus do they have the qualifications for the job? Or I don't like them, I'm not going to hire them versus do they have the qualifications for the job? I like Teslas, so I'm going to invest in Tesla versus looking at all the things that you would normally look at to make an investment, stuff like that. So Jan says 5, cognitive bias. Okay, so we've got some middle of the roads. Now, some people who voted 3, that was from 1 to 5. So they're not saying 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. And some people, if you're saying 9, you're like, way more. So we're working off different scales. But the ones that are saying 5 and 3 are probably right in the middle. And unless 5 is maybe 5, you're not super knowledgeable about cognitive biases. Okay, we've got cognitive biases, cognitive biases, cognitive biases. Okay, excellent. All right, so if we look at what causes what, if you had to look at what these things that derail your decisions, could you agree that maybe implicit bias is up here? It shows up, maybe it shows up as racism or sexism or ableism or any of the isms. And then below that are the shortcuts, heuristics that our brains make to help us make quicker decisions. Would you say that could you agree that the cognitive biases kind of support or cause, or maybe, maybe cause the implicit biases? And that we're going to go deeper because there's a layer below that. And that's the layer that's hidden from us. And that's the layer that you can actually do something about without memorizing, without studying, without doing much of anything. It's kind of the easiest layer to control, and it's the most ignored. All right, so let's get into some of the basic cognitive biases so that we can set that aside and understand that, yeah, those are out there, and we can acknowledge that it's not just other people that experience them, it's us too, and then we'll go deeper. So one of the biggest and most powerful biases that hide from us, that really hide from us and derail our decisions is the framing trap. And this is the way that problems are framed. And a frame can establish the status quo, or it can introduce a different anchor. And by that, I mean, I'll give you an example. And this is kind of a real world, a field study example. There were 2 states, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ray, I think this is your state, Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And they were both looking at new legislation to help insurance companies, auto insurance companies, reduce the costs of reduce their hits. So they decided to implement something that would limit how much you could sue. And if you took that limit to how much you could sue, you would get a reduced premium. So they could reduce the premiums and put limits on how much you could sue, the right to sue drivers. And that would ultimately increase the profitability of these insurance companies. All right. So there's 2 different ways that they did this. They framed this. And so we'll see what you think. Are you ready? In New Jersey, people automatically got the limited right to sue and the reduced premiums unless they opted out. So the status quo was the new way. You got the limited right to sue, but you got the reduced premium unless you put the check mark that you didn't want that option. And in Pennsylvania, they got the full right to sue. The status quo was the old status quo. And if they wanted the limited right to sue and the reduced premiums, they could check mark this. All right. Which state, New Jersey or Pennsylvania, took advantage of over $200 million in savings? Is that kind of clear? Who wants to take a stab at the answer? And since there's a little delay, I'll keep going, because it turns out that people default to the status quo. So anytime you want to frame an option, you are going to have a better chance of having it framed, if you're going to do the framing it as the status quo is what you want them to land on with an option to opt out, then the status quo is where you are now with an option to opt in. New Jersey, ding, 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 ding. New Jersey. Yes, New Jersey. So we've got, of course, the good thinkers get it right. But policymakers don't, and neither do we. And there's 2 ways of thinking about this. Number one, how do we frame things for other people? But the thing that we are working on here is our own metacognition. So that would mean, how are people framing things for us in ways that are derailing our decisions that we never see? How many opt-ins are establishing a status quo for us? In other words, if you don't opt out or you don't opt in or you don't go here, this is the status quo, and that's where we want you to go. And it's the inertia that we go along thinking we're making a decision. That's what you look out for. So with framing, you can look for those kinds of things. And that's why I love cognitive bias training. Yeah, that's the classic nudge. Absolutely. Classic nudge, default status quo. And it's classic, and yet it's still hidden from us more often than not. I mean, it's been the nudge. I mean, many of us have read that book. Many of us know these concepts, and yet still we make these same mistakes. And this framing can take many different forms. The insurance company shows one example. It can establish a status quo or establish an anchor, some kind of random, like I could throw out, some number, and that would actually frame how you decide on things, and it would be hidden from you. So researchers have been studying the ways our minds function for centuries in a laboratory and in the field. So we now know that there are unconscious routines to cope with the complexity inherent in our decisions, and we call these heuristics. They help us make our decisions. And for example, one of the heuristics that you think, okay, are all heuristics bad? Are all biases bad? What do you think? Are all heuristics or biases bad? No. Take the heuristic about the complexity of judging distances. So if I look across the street and I see a car way far away, how is my brain going to judge whether it's safe to cross the street? I use a heuristic. And the heuristic has to do with clarity and proximity. It's our brain. So if something's kind of fuzzy in the distance, and I have my glasses on because, if something's fuzzy like this, I can't even see well enough to judge the distance. But if something is fuzzier, the fuzzier it is, the farther away it appears to our brains. And this simple mental shortcut helps us make continuous stream of distance judgments required to navigate the world. But heuristics aren't foolproof. Actually, on days that are hazier than normal, sometimes our eyes will play tricks on us. And on hazier days, when there is more cloud cover or air pollution, we see more accidents based on our decisions where we use heuristics. And that's going to be a little hint at what you can do about it. All right. So you need to make decisions anyway. Absolutely. Okay. So researchers identified a whole bunch of flaws in our thinking and how we make decisions, like the clarity decision. And these traps are often so dangerous, but they're invisible because sometimes they're helpful. They're hardwired into our thinking processes. And we could go on and on and on and on about with these. I could give you examples and studies till you're blue in the face, but I think you already know that these things are in play. So what causes VOMPs? What causes thoughts to come into our brains in the first place? Well, we will the thoughts to come into our brains. Where does the thought come from to will where do thoughts come from? Well, once you kind of take a step back and realize that thoughts happen, they float in, they float out, we grasp them. Maybe they're out there in the ether and we pick them. Who knows? Where do thoughts come from? Once you realize that we don't really have answers to those kinds of questions, you can skip. Continue to memorize and identify and get better at seeing all kinds of cognitive biases that cause implicit bias, that cause explicit bias. Explicit bias probably being the thing we should care about most. Like if I have a thought in my brain that I wish wasn't there, but I don't act on it, I don't tell you, I don't do anything about it, maybe it's not so bad that it's implicit. Maybe it only becomes bad when it becomes explicit. So how do we put systems in place to control the things we can't control? control the hidden things that derail our decisions just a little bit, not total control, just a little bit more. I mean, we don't control our place of birth. That probably has the biggest impact on our decisions. We don't control our genetics, our microbiomes. Maybe we do by what we eat, but don't control a lot of that. Exposure to toxins, exposure to early education, exposure to good and bad experiences. Yeah, so we have a good shot here. Insecurities or fear. Where do our thoughts come from? Well, where does the thought of insecurity or fear come from? Some people experience the exact same thing and have fear, other people don't. Or if people take offense and other people don't for the same exact thing. Where do these thoughts come from? All right, so let's get into things that research shows that you might be able to control more than you think. What are some things? Emotions, social norms, expectations, relationships, even mutual understanding, and a lot of other invisible factors affect our decisions. So I'll share a few more studies to help you see that VOMPs that result in derailed decisions might not be covered in your average decision-making or bias training. Are you ready? Think about judges making decisions about the length of time a convicted criminal must spend in jail. How do you think the length of the sentence that a judge gives is impacted by the temperature on the day of sentencing? Do you think it doesn't matter? A judge who is sophisticated, experienced judge would look at the facts, and the temperature that day would have no impact on the judge's decision. So that would be A, no impact. Or do you think B, the hotter the day, the longer the sentence? Or how about this? The hotter the day, the shorter the sentence. So do you think A, no impact? The temperature in the room, outside, has no impact on the length that a judge would give, given the same set of circumstances. Or if it's hotter, you're going to get a longer sentence. If it's colder, you're going to get a shorter sentence. Well, I'm going to give a bonus for a guessing no impact, because I think most of us would think no impact. I'm going to convince you otherwise, because it turns out you don't want to be a defendant on a hot day, nor do you want your sentencing to take place before lunch or after your judge's favorite sports team lost a big game, or if you remind the judge of a son or daughter that the judge doesn't really like, or someone that the judge likes, because it actually, these things cause VOMPs. And it doesn't matter if you are the highest court judge, the most educated, sophisticated person. This is what I'm trying to convince you about: looking deeper, looking beneath the implicit bias, beneath the cognitive bias, to see that variations in our mental processes take place at a level that we don't have access to. So we need to put guardrails in place. We need to just say, okay, I'm just going to believe this and put the guardrails in place. So we have got possibly B. It is mind-blowing. And the more you read about things, and I'll give a few more examples, the more you learn about these things, these temperature, barometric pressure, particulates in the air, the amount of number of hours you slept, how much water you've had, the food you've had, how much these things impact your decisions, you will realize that before making big decisions, these are some things you should consider and put in place. Okay, there should be air conditioning, probably B. The hotter, the longer. So most people who are guessing who go against their intuition, where you feel like, no, there's no way that would affect it, the hotter, the longer. I remember a nudge has an example like that: coffee, cold water, no drinks at all. Actually, there's even, if you're drinking a warm drink, we tend to make different kinds of moral judgments about the same scenario than when we're drinking a cold drink. I mean, all kinds of things affect us in ways that are invisible to us. Human behaviors impact whether we admit it or not. Exactly. And that's the point of VOMPs. That's the point of VOMPs. So we're going to spend the last minute. It's true. You can take all the training, the bias training you want, but we need to change the way we think about our environments and about our bodies when we're making big decisions. Studies suggest that particulate matter exposure is a cause of short-term cognitive decline. And many, many studies have seen this. Like, do you want to take the SATs on a day where there is a high level of particulate matter in the sky, in the atmosphere where you are? Probably not. One study found that a statistically robust decline in cognitive function on this mini mental state exam after exposure to a room with a candle burning, and separately to exposure to during a day with a high PM, a high particulate matter. So don't light a candle in the room as you're contemplating a big decision. Well, wait a minute, I like candles. It calms my nerves. It might feel that way, but maybe those particulates actually impact your cognitive function. Other studies show, all kinds of things, temperatures. Warm temperatures tend to make participants more likely to rely on simplistic patterns of decision-making, which result in inferior choices. So how do you prevent VOMPs? Let's go over it really quickly, then we'll end. So we're only a couple minutes late. Number one, don't make important decisions when you're too hot. Don't make important decisions when you're too cold. Goldilocks the temperature when you are working on decisions. Don't make decisions when you're hungry. Don't make decisions when you have not had, or when I say decisions, I mean big decisions. Don't make big decisions when you haven't had your average day's worth of water. And if your average day's worth of water is, I barely drink any water, or I have maybe 8 ounces a day, up it. Water, hydration affects cognition. When you've had less than 7 hours sleep, delay the decision. When you're mad, delay the decision. When you're happy, why should I delay the decision when I'm happy? Do it. Delay the decision when you're overly mad or overly happy. Just get into this neutral zone. When you're in more pain than usual, do not make a decision when you're in pain. When the air quality is worse than usual. And you can look this up. You can actually look up PMs. You could look up particulate matter and different air quality and make the decision. And if you're a company, make sure that the room where the decision makers are making that decision is the right temperature, is comfortable, is not right before lunch, is not when they're hungry, is not when they're tired. It's not when it's been 3 days of a workshop where people are exhausted. Put the conditions in place so that we don't have to memorize all these biases and try to play whack-a-mole, that we can give ourselves a better opportunity to avoid letting VOMPs derail our decisions. Making decisions is one of the most important jobs for ourselves, for our careers, professions, for our lives. It's also one of the toughest and riskiest. Bad decisions can damage a career, can damage a life, can damage a business. But sometimes the fault lies in the process. Maybe you don't have the process in place. And sometimes it just resides deeper in our human, all the things that affect our human body. So far, the best protection we have now against VOMPs, or to control VOMPs, to reduce those psychological traps, so far it's awareness. But we also now know that awareness is not enough, because our brains do what they do in spite of our best intentions. Thoughts happen. So if you acknowledge that VOMPs mean that our decisions are impacted in hidden ways that go deeper than being able to identify a bias here or there, you can put your judging instrument, your body, not just your brain, it's all one thing, all connected, into the best position to avoid having VOMPs derail your decisions. It says you can't control the decision makers like a judge to move into a better temperature. Well, but if you are in control of your own environment, or you're running an organization, or you're running a meeting, something you can remember. You don't have to see it to know it's there. See you. I don't know if we're going to be here next week, but always check for every Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the West Coast, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. YouTube Live, LinkedIn Live. You can join YouTube and get notifications. I think if you follow Becky Saltzman, either YouTube or LinkedIn, I think you probably get notifications, but I don't know how that works. So you know the drill. Hope to see you guys next time. Enjoy your week.